App switcher. Books, 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 file, Safari. Understanding the IPCC. Heading Level 1. Link. Main. Landmark.
Oh, be quiet. Welcome to Understanding the IPCC number 9. Working Group 3, Mitigation of Climate Change. Part C.
Image.
This is, of course, where we're
Actions
starting from.
available. Possibly.
Understanding the
A pair of
IPCC.
eyeglasses on a white surface.
Be quiet.
Question mark.
Wow.
Button. Possibly.
Technology
Locked.
takes away. Meetup.com. This is the group that we're originating from. Live meets converted to video meets.
Carl Sagan.
Normally
Heading
at this
Level
point,
1.
I quote
Main.
Carl Sagan.
Landmark.
Because of his interest in disseminating scientific knowledge and approach to day-to-day life and its benefits to people in general, which is a viewpoint that we share as well. I'm not going into lengthy introductions, as I've said before, because this is a 4-part series for one report, and I did all these introductions at the beginning of A. And so B, C, and D, I'm just going to abbreviate the introductions and hope that you know what you're listening to.
AR5 Climate Change 2014, Mitigation of Climate Change. Heading Level 1.
So this is the spot where the information comes from, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change website. Everything you're about to see comes from their site. I download it from their pages, and all the accreditation, all the links for all of these things are in the notes on the YouTube page. If you're listening to this without watching it on YouTube and you want this information in a different form, you can get a hold of me.
AR5 Climate Change 2014. AR5 Climate Change 2014. Mitigate. Music Alive. Magazine website.
Oh, there we go.
Barefoot Freelance Web. A Talking 403. A Talking Game at barefootfreelance.ca.
This is the company I'm running this through, A Talking Game. It's diversity and inclusion presentation facilitation. At the moment, I'm using it to present information on improving the world, basically. It's not diversity and inclusion, but I hope you forgive me. There's contact information here. Also,
40 A Talking Game YouTube channel.
Link to the
Visited.
YouTube channel,
link.
Which is very important.
Actions available.
Potentially, that's how you got to the video you're watching right now. This is the A Talking Game YouTube channel.
7 views. Introduction from Indigenous. 7 bullet. 8 months ago. Action menu. 8 bullet. 8 action. Who they are. Number 1. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and their 2018 synthesis report by A Talking Game 8 months ago. 1 hour. 7 minutes 61 views.
So that
Heading
video
Level 3.
is the
link.
first in the series. We're up to number 9 right now. If you're coming to this video fresh without watching 1 through 8, that's a mistake, because this number 1 and number 2 as well.
60 bullet. 8 months ago. Action menu. What they say. Number 2. The IPCC's Working Group 1 on the physical science basis of their reports by A Talking Game 8 months ago. 1 hour. 48 minutes 208 views. Heading Level 3.
It's
link.
on a different report, but I do give a more extensive introduction about why you're listening to my iPad, why a legally blind guy is doing videos, why you should care about who they are and what they say, as the titles say. So those places introduce these things, and then from 3 onward, the introductions become much less foundational, because basically these videos will go on forever otherwise. So having said that, I'm now going to move on. I strongly recommend, if this is new to you, that you go to 1 or 2 at the very least, but definitely 1 I think is your best bet. If you want to skip around, that's your business. And if you're a climate scientist, you can go wherever you want, do whatever you want. You won't have a problem, but you probably won't need to watch these videos either.
Visit. Link. Image. A photo containing a textile. Apps with books. Active. Books.
So having said
Books.
those things,
Page 1 of 1.
because I am legally blind, I'm sensitive to the need for accessibility online and also usability, because there's a tremendous amount of information. So I've created an index page. You can see it here. If you're listening to it, I will run through the text in a moment. As I do every time I show this page, I recommend that you perhaps take a screenshot, because when we get 2 chapters in and you're wanting to go, I don't know what you're wanting to do, but anyways, go for pizza and or you want to skip a chapter, you can figure that out by doing some math with the pages, and eventually I will get the timings into the comments on when each chapter actually begins, but I don't have that now. But this tells you what order they're in. It tells you that if you're not interested in these chapters, maybe back in part B, you forgot that they had a section on drivers, which is drivers of climate change, which I forgot myself actually. Anyway, index for you. I'm now going to run through the text, let the text be read for listeners. As I said, take a screenshot if you're watching this. If you're listening to it, you may want to pause this and take notes on the stuff that's useful to you. And yeah.
AR5 Climate Change 2014, Mitigation of Climate Change. The Working Group 3 Contribution to the IPCC's 5th Assessment Report, AR5, assesses literature on the scientific, technological, environmental, economic and social aspects of mitigation of climate change since 2007, when the 4th Assessment Report, AR4, was released. -40 pages, 15 page, 15 chapters, 4 parts. Part A 9 PGS. Chapter 2 Integrated Risk and Uncertainty Assessment of Climate Change Response Policies 3 PGS. Chapter 12 Human Settlements, Infrastructure and Spatial Planning 3 PGS. Chapter 3 Social, Economic and Ethical Concepts and Methods 3 PGS. Part B 9 PGS. Chapter 11 Agriculture, Forestry and Other Land Use, AFOLU, 2 PGS. Chapter 4 Sustainable Development and Equity 2 PGS. Chapter 10 Industry 2 PGS. Chapter 5 Drivers, Trends and Mitigation 3 PGS. Part C 12 PGS. Chapter 9 Buildings 3 PGS. Chapter 6 Assessing Transformation Pathways 3 PGS. Chapter 8 Transport 3 PGS. Chapter 13 International Cooperation, Agreements and Instruments 3 PGS. Part D 10 PGS. Chapter 7 Energy Systems 3 PGS. Chapter 14 Regional Development and Cooperation 3 PGS. Chapter 15 National and Subnational Policies and Institutions 3 PGS. Chapter 16 Cross-Cutting Investment and Finance Issues 1 PGS.
Okie doke. Let's give it a go. Oh, I want to do this.
Library. Button. SPM Summary for Policy. Page 5. Fact Sheet. Judith. Page 4. 15 National and Subnational. Page 2. 7 Energy System. 8 9 Buildings. Toolbar. Pay. There is a broad portfolio. Chapter 9. Buildings. Exec Buildings.
Just to confirm, yes, the chapter is only titled Buildings. That's the title.
Executive Summary. In 2010, buildings accounted for 32% of total global final energy use, 19% of energy-related GHG emissions, including electricity-related, approximately 1/3 of black carbon emissions, and 1/8 to 1/3 of F-gases. Medium evidence. Medium agreement. This energy use and related emissions may double or potentially even triple by mid-century due to several key trends. A very important trend is the increased access for billions of people in developing countries to adequate housing, electricity, and improved cooking facilities. The ways in which these energy-related needs will be provided will significantly determine trends in building energy use and related emissions. In addition, population growth, migration to cities, household size changes, and increasing levels of wealth and lifestyle changes globally will all contribute to significant increases in building energy use. The substantial new construction that is taking place in developing countries represents both a Significant risk and opportunity from a mitigation perspective, sections 9.1, 9.2. In contrast to a doubling or tripling, final energy use may stay constant or even decline by mid-century, as compared to today's levels, if today's cost-effective best practices and technologies are broadly diffused. Robust evidence. High agreement. The technology solutions to realize this potential exist and are well demonstrated. Recent advances in technology, design practices and know-how, coupled with behavioral changes, can achieve a 2 to 10-fold reduction in energy requirements of individual new buildings and a 2 to 4-fold reduction for individual existing buildings, largely cost-effectively or sometimes even at net negative costs. New improved energy efficiency technologies have been developed as existing energy efficiency opportunities have been taken up, so that the potential for cost-effective energy efficiency improvement has not been diminishing. Recent developments in technology and know-how enable construction and retrofit of very low and zero energy buildings, often at little marginal investment cost, typically paying back well within the building lifetime. Robust evidence. High agreement. In existing buildings, 50-90% energy savings have been achieved throughout the world through deep retrofits. Medium evidence. High agreement. Energy efficient appliances, lighting, information communication, IT, and media technologies can reduce the substantial increases in electricity use that are expected due to the proliferation of equipment types used and their increased ownership and use. Robust evidence. High agreement. 9.2, 9.3. Strong barriers hinder the market uptake of these cost-effective opportunities, and large potentials will remain untapped without adequate policies. Robust evidence. High agreement. These barriers include imperfect information, split incentives, lack of awareness, transaction costs, inadequate access to financing, and industry fragmentation. In developing countries, corruption, inadequate service levels, subsidized energy prices, and high discount rates are additional barriers. Market forces alone are not likely to achieve the necessary transformation without external stimuli. Policy intervention addressing all stages of the building and appliance lifecycle and use, plus new business and financial models are essential. 9.8, 9.10. There is a broad portfolio of effective policy instruments available to remove these barriers, some of them being implemented also in developing countries, thus saving emissions at large negative costs. Robust evidence. High agreement. Overall, the history of energy efficiency programs in buildings shows that 25-30% efficiency improvements have been available at costs substantially lower than marginal supply. Dynamic developments in building-related policies in some developed countries have demonstrated the effectiveness of such instruments, as total building energy use has started to decrease while accommodating continued economic, and in some cases, population growth. Building codes and appliance standards with strong energy efficiency requirements that are well enforced, tightened over time, and made appropriate to local climate and other conditions have been among the most environmentally and cost-effective. Net zero energy buildings are technically demonstrated, but may not always be the most cost and environmentally effective solutions. Experience shows that pricing is less effective than programs and regulation. Medium evidence. Medium agreement. Financing instruments, policies, and other opportunities are available to improve energy efficiency in buildings, but the results obtained to date are still insufficient to deliver the full potential. Medium evidence. Medium agreement. Combined and enhanced, these approaches could provide significant further improvements in terms of both enhanced energy access and energy efficiency. Delivering low-carbon options raises major challenges for data, research, education, capacity building, and training. 9.10. Due to the very long lifespans of buildings and retrofits, there is a very significant lock-in risk, pointing to the urgency of ambitious and immediate measures. Robust evidence. Medium agreement. Even if the most ambitious of currently planned policies are implemented, approximately 80% of 2005 energy use in buildings globally will be locked in by 2050 for decades, compared to a scenario where today's best practice buildings become the standard in new building construction and existing building retrofit. As a result, the urgent adoption of state-of-the-art performance standards, in both new and retrofit buildings, avoids locking in carbon-intensive options for several decades. 9.4. In addition to technologies and architecture, behavior, lifestyle, and culture have a major effect on buildings' energy use. 3 to 5-fold difference in energy use has been shown for provision of similar building related energy service levels. Limited evidence, high agreement. In developed countries, evidence indicates that behaviors informed by awareness of energy and climate issues can reduce demand by up to 20% in the short term and 50% of present levels by 2050. Alternative development pathways exist that can moderate the growth of energy use in developing countries through the provision of high levels of building services at much lower energy inputs. Incorporating certain elements of traditional lifestyles and architecture, and can avoid such trends. In developed countries, the concept of SUF. 9. 675. Buildings Chapter 9. Table 91 Summary of chapter's main findings organized by 9. Tables. Carbon efficient, energy efficient, system, service, mitigation, building in, high perform, passive, behavior, potential, solar, 9 point, minus 20, cost, end, retro, pH, co-benefit, CB, key, subtract, imperfect information, risk, 9.5%, CB, employment, transaction, key, bearer, key, key, car, bill, b, efficiency has also been emerging, going beyond pure efficiency. Reducing energy demand includes rationally meeting floor space needs. 9.3.
Well, that was painful. They obviously didn't have voiceover in mind when they set up this page.
App switcher. Files. Figure 9. Close file. Activate. File.
So,
Figure 9. Files. Done.
It's time for pictures. Very exciting for the visual amongst
Figure
you.
9.1. Done. Button. List. Button. Figure 9.1. 29 of 6. Figure 9.1. Figure 9.1. A screenshot of a graph with text and numbers. Possible text. Direct. Done. List. Button. Figure 2.2. Figure 3. Rows 12. Rows 20. Figure 9.1. Figure 9.2.
So
PN. Done. Button.
In this chapter?
Figure 9.2. A group of multicolored graphs on a white background.
Oh, a group of
Possible
graphs.
text. Oh.
This should keep you busy for a while. Again, in case y'all have forgotten, because I don't know why I'd forget, but this is the time. We're about 20 minutes in probably. Perhaps you should pause it here. Get a new cup of coffee or tea or distilled water, or the sun's shining really nicely. Take a breath of air for a moment. I'll be here when you come back, I promise. Except right now I'm moving on to...
Done. List. Button.
The third
Figure 3.3, rows 12, figure 6.37, rows 20, figure 9.1, figure 9.3, PNG image. Done. Button. Figure 9.3. A multicolored map with text and numbers.
Multicolored maps. I mean, don't get the impression that...
App switcher.
I don't actually care about
Files.
images.
Safari. Books. Files. Books. Books.
There it is.
Active.
Ironically, I'm
Books.
a very visual person.
Books.
It's just that
Page.
they don't work
6
anymore.
of 68.
Okay, where's...
Energy costs 670.
No.
Efficiency.
Oh.
Beyond energy efficiency has
Efficiency.
also beyond energy cost savings. Most mitigation options in this sector have other significant and diverse beyond energy cost savings. Most mitigation options in this sector have other significant and diverse co-benefits, robust evidence, high agreement. Taken together, the monetizable co-benefits of many energy efficiency measures alone often substantially exceed the energy cost savings and possibly the climate benefits. Medium evidence, medium agreement, with the non-monetizable benefits often also being significant, robust evidence, high agreement. These benefits offer attractive entry points for action into policy making, even in countries or jurisdictions where financial resources for mitigation are limited. Robust evidence, high agreement. These entry points include, but are not limited to, energy security, lower need for energy subsidies, health, due to 676. Chapter 9. Buildings. Reduced indoor and outdoor building. Reduced indoor and outdoor air pollution as well as fuel poverty alleviation, and environmental benefits, productivity and net employment gains, alleviated energy and fuel poverties as well as reduced energy expenditures, increased value for building infrastructure, improved comfort and services, medium evidence, high agreement. However, these are rarely internalized by policies, while a number of tools and approaches are available to quantify and monetize co-benefits that can help this integration. Medium evidence, medium agreement, 9.7.
So you've kind of got
App Switcher, Safari, Files, Figure, Safari, Tyrrell, Files,
a visually intensive
Figure 9. Files, done,
presentation this
button,
time,
Figure 9.3, done, list,
because
button,
a couple of these chapters have
Figure 4.1, PNG,
Lots of
rows
figures.
12 to rows 20, Figure 9.2, Figure 9.3, Figure 9.22, PNG image 300,
this one
done,
apparently has
button,
24 images. Because I go to the end, so the last three are 22 to 24.
Figure 9.22, a multicolored map with text and numbers,
You're just teasing me now with
done,
multicolored maps.
list,
I hope they
button,
look good.
Figure 3.3, rows 12 to rows 20, Figure 9.3, Figure 9.22, Figure 9.23, PNG, done, button. Figure 9.23, a graph with multicolored dots on a white background, possible text,
Pause
maximum,
video, Eckemeier.
2 0 1 0 2 0 2 0 2 0
Oh,
3,
right.
done, list, button.
That's just a graph.
Figure
showing off.
4.1, rows 12, rows 20, Figure 9.3, Figure 9.23, Figure 9.24, PNG, done,
Concentrating
button.
information in a visual presentation. What a nerve.
Figure 9.24, a bar graph with multicolored bars and text.
Hope it's good for you.
App Switcher, Safari, Tyrrell, Books, Active, Book. In summary, reduced indoor and outdoor air pollution, building, chapter, bookmark, buildings. Reduced indoor and outdoor air, in summary, buildings represent a critical piece of a low-carbon future and a global challenge for integration with sustainable development. Robust evidence, high agreement. Buildings embody the biggest unmet need for basic energy services, especially in developing countries, while much existing energy use in buildings in developed countries is very wasteful and inefficient. Existing and future buildings will determine a large proportion of global energy demand. Current trends indicate the potential for massive increases in energy demand and associated emissions. However, this chapter shows that buildings offer immediately available, highly cost-effective opportunities to reduce growth and energy demand, while contributing to meeting other key sustainable development goals including poverty alleviation, energy security, and improved employment. This potential is more fully represented in sectoral models than in many integrated models, as the latter do not represent any or all of the options to cost-effectively reduce building energy use. Realizing these opportunities requires aggressive and sustained policies and action to address every aspect of the design, construction, and operation of buildings and their equipment around the world. The significant advances in building codes and appliance standards in some jurisdictions over the last decade already demonstrated that they were able to reverse total building energy use trends in developed countries to its stagnation or reduction. However, in order to reach ambitious climate goals, these standards need to be substantially strengthened and adopted for further jurisdictions, building types, and vintages. 9.6, 9.9, 9.10. Table 9.1 summarizes some main findings of the chapter by key mitigation strategy. App Switcher, Books, Active,
Books. That went
Book,
quickly,
9
actually.
building, Books,
In my mind
page,
it did.
7 of 6, Reduced indoor and outdoor air
there-
pollution, Library,
Okay, that went
button,
quickly in my brain. Apparently didn't
Library,
have time to
back
start.
button, 11 agriculture, 10, 9 buildings, 8, 6 assessing transformation
That's where we're
pathway,
going.
toolbar, pay, all major emitting, 6, executive summary, 6,
where's the
executive,
title?
bookmark, Search. Appearance. Markup. 6. Assessing transformation pathways. Heading.
That's the title.
Markup. Appearance. Search. Bookmarked. 6. Executives. Stabilizing greenhouse gas. GHG. Concentrations will require large-scale transformations in human societies, from the way that we produce and consume energy to how we use the land surface. A natural question in this context is what will be the transformation pathway towards stabilization, that is, how do we get from here to there? The topic of this chapter is transformation pathways. The chapter is primarily motivated by 3 questions. First, what are the near-term and future choices that define transformation pathways, including the goal itself, the emissions pathway to the goal, technologies used for and sectors contributing to mitigation, the nature of international coordination, and mitigation policies? Second, what are the key characteristics of different transformation pathways, including the rates of emissions reductions and deployment of low-carbon energy, the magnitude and timing of aggregate economic costs, and the implications for other policy objectives such as those generally associated with sustainable development? Third, how will actions taken today influence the options that might be available in the future? As part of the assessment in this chapter, data from over 1,000 new scenarios published since the IPCC Fourth Assessment Report, AR4, were collected from integrated modeling research groups, many from large-scale model intercomparison studies. In comparison to AR4, new scenarios, both in this AR5 dataset and more broadly in the literature assessed in this chapter, consider more ambitious concentration goals, a wider range of assumptions about technology, and more possibilities for delays in additional global mitigation beyond that of today and fragmented international action. Atmospheric concentrations in baseline scenarios collected for this assessment, scenarios without additional efforts to constrain emissions beyond those of today, all exceed 450 parts per million, ppm, carbon dioxide equivalent, CO2 by 2030 and lie above the RCP 60 representative concentration pathway in 2100, 770 ppm CO2 in 2100. The majority lie below the RCP 85 concentration pathway in 2100, 1330 ppm CO2 in 2100, high confidence. The scenario literature does not systematically explore the full range of uncertainty surrounding development pathways and the possible evolution of key drivers such as population, technology, and resources. However, the baseline scenarios do nonetheless strongly suggest that absent explicit efforts at mitigation, cumulative CO2 emissions since 2010 will exceed 700 gigatons CO2 by 2030, exceed 1,500 gigatons CO2 by 2050, and potentially be well over 4,000 gigatons CO2 by 2100, Section 6.3.1. Scenarios can be distinguished by the long-term concentration level they reach by 2100, however, the degree to which concentrations exceed, overshoot, this level before 2100 is also important, high confidence. The large majority of scenarios produced in the literature that reach about 450 ppm CO2 by 2100 are characterized by concentration overshoot facilitated by the deployment of carbon dioxide removal, CDR, technologies. Many scenarios have been constructed to reach about 550 ppm CO2 by 2100 without overshoot. Scenarios with more overshoot exhibit less mitigation today, but they often rest on the assumption that future decision makers deploy CDR technologies at large scale. An assessment in this chapter of geophysical climate uncertainties consistent with the dynamics of Earth system models assessed in Working Group I, WGI, provides estimates of the temperature implications of different emissions pathways. This assessment found that the likelihood of exceeding temperature goals this century increases with peak concentration levels, which are higher in overshoot scenarios. 6.3.2. All major emitting regions make substantial reductions from their baseline CO2 emissions over the century in scenarios that bring atmospheric concentrations to about 550 ppm CO2 or below by 2100, high confidence. In most scenarios collected for this assessment that reach concentrations of about 550 ppm CO2 eq by 2100, global CO2 eq emissions are reduced by more than 50%, and in some cases by more than 100%. By the end of the century relative to 2010 levels, the CO2 eq emissions are brought to near or below zero by 2100 in the majority of the scenarios, reaching concentrations of about 450 ppm CO2 eq by 2100, in large part because baseline emissions from the countries not part of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) in 1990 are projected to outstrip those from the OECD 1990 countries. The total CO2 eq reductions from baseline occurring in the non-OECD 1990 countries are larger than in the OECD 1990 countries, particularly in scenarios that cost-effectively allocate emissions reductions across countries. Emissions peak earlier in the OECD 1990 countries than in the non-OECD 1990 countries in these cost-effective scenarios. 6, 3, 2. Bringing concentrations to about 550 ppm CO2 eq or below by 2100 will require large-scale changes to global and national energy systems, and potentially to the use of land. These changes are inconsistent with both long and short-term trends. High confidence. Accelerated electrification of energy end use, coupled with decarbonization of the majority of electricity generation by 2050 and an associated facade of freely emitting coal generation, is a common feature of scenarios reaching about 550 ppm CO2 eq or less by 2100. Scenarios suggest that sectors currently using liquid fuel are more costly to decarbonize than electricity and may be among the last sectors to be decarbonized for deep CO2 emissions reductions. Scenarios articulate very different changes in the land surface, reflecting different assumptions about the potential for bioenergy production, afforestation, and reduced deforestation. Studies indicate a large potential for energy use reductions, but also demonstrate that these reductions will not be sufficient by themselves to constrain GHG emissions. 6, 3, 4, 6, 3, 5, 6.8. Estimates of the aggregate economic costs of mitigation vary widely, but increase with stringency of mitigation, high confidence. Most scenario studies collected for this assessment that are based on the idealized assumptions that all countries of the world begin mitigation immediately. There is a single global carbon price applied to well-functioning markets, and key technologies are available. Estimate. Assessing transformation pathways. Chapter 6. 418. Chapter 6. Assessing transformation pathways. That reaching about 450 ppm CO2 eq by 2100 would entail global consumption losses of 1-4% in 2030, median of 1.7%, 2-6% in 2050, median of 3.4%, and 3-11% in 2100, median of 4.8%, relative to what would happen without mitigation. These consumption losses correspond to an annual average reduction of consumption growth of 0.06 to 0.20 percentage points from 2010 to 2030, median of 0.09, 0.06 to 0.17 percentage points through 2050, median of 0.09, and 0.04 to 0.14 percentage points over the century, median of 0.06. To put these losses in context, studies assume annual average consumption growth rates without mitigation between 1.9% and 3.8% per year until 2050 and between 1.6% and 3.0% per year over the century. These growth rates correspond to increases in total consumption from roughly 4-fold to over 10-fold over the century. Costs for maintaining concentrations at around 550 ppm CO2 eq are estimated to be roughly 1/3 to 2/3 lower. Substantially higher and lower cost estimates have been obtained based on assumptions about less idealized policy implementations, interactions with pre-existing distortions, non-climate market failures, or complementary policies. Limits on technology and delayed mitigation are discussed below. 6, 3, 6. App switcher. Safari.
As I said,
Files.
lots
Figure
of
9.
pictures this time, another group of
Figure 9.
6.
Files. Done. Button.
That's chapter 6.
Done. List. Button. Figure 3.2. Rows 12. Figure 6.2. Figure 6.1. PNG. Done. Button.
So there'll be
Figure
two groups of
6.1.
3.
A group of graphs and graphs on a white background.
A group of graphs. See, and I kind of pity you if they bother to
Done.
put a group
Button. List.
of graphs.
Button.
You know,
Figure 3.3.
That's a lot of
PNG. Rows 12. Figure 6.3. Figure 6.2. PN. Done. Button.
and please,
Figure 6.2. A screenshot of a graph with dots and text.
if you run into me somewhere at a presentation when we can eventually do these live again someday in the far distant future.
Done. List. Button. Figure
Don't
2.
stop me and
Figure
say, you know,
3.3. Rows 12. Figure 6.37. PNG image. Done.
That's not the right
Button.
one.
Done. List. Button. Figure 3.3. Rows 12. Figure 6.36. Figure 6.3. PNG image
Don't
80.
stop me and
Done.
say, you know, in
Button.
chapter 6, in the images, the second page was about, or asked me about what it said on page 5 of chapter 6 in part C of, you know, because.
Done.
I'm
Button.
human.
List.
Oops, that's not what I
Button.
do.
Figure 6. App switcher. Files. Doc.
I'm a journalist.
Settings.
Oops.
Mail. Files.
Oh, now I've done it.
Markup. Files. Done. Apps. Safari. Books. Active. Books. Books. Page. That read. Assessing transfer. Chapter. Bookmarked. Chapters. Assessing transformation. That reaching about 450 ppm CO2 EC by 2000. Effort sharing frameworks could help address distributional issues and decouple regional mitigation investments from financial burdens, but could be associated with significant international financial flows. Medium confidence. In the absence of effort sharing frameworks, cost-effectively allocating emissions across countries would yield an uneven distribution of mitigation costs. Scenarios indicate that this would lead to higher relative costs in developing economies as well as for many fossil fuel exporters. Studies exploring effort-sharing frameworks in the context of a global carbon market estimate that the financial flows to ameliorate this asymmetry could be on the order of hundreds of billions of USD per year before mid-century to bring concentrations to about 450 ppm CO2 EC in 2100. 6. Emissions through 2030 will have strong implications for the challenges of, and options for, bringing concentrations to about 450 to about 500 ppm CO2 EC by the end of the 21st century. High confidence. The vast majority of cost-effective scenarios leading to 2100 concentrations of about 450 to about 500 ppm CO2 EC are characterized by 2030 emissions roughly between 30 gigatons CO2 equivalent and 50 gigatons CO2 equivalent. Scenarios with emissions above 55 gigatons CO2 equivalent in 2030 are predominantly driven by delays in additional mitigation relative to what would be most cost-effective. These scenarios are characterized by substantially higher rates of emissions reductions from 2030 to 2050, a larger reliance on CDR technologies in the long term, and higher transitional and long-term economic impacts. Due to these challenges, many models with 2030 emissions in this range could not produce scenarios reaching about 450 ppm CO2 EC in 2100. Studies confirm that delaying additional mitigation through 2030 has substantially larger influence on the subsequent challenges of mitigation than delaying only through 2020. 6.4. The availability of key technologies and improvements in the cost and performance of these technologies will have important implications for the challenge of achieving concentration goals. High confidence. Many models in recent multi-model comparisons could not produce scenarios reaching approximately 450 ppm CO2 EC by 2100 with broadly pessimistic assumptions about key mitigation technologies. Large-scale deployment of CDR technologies in particular is relied upon in many of these scenarios in the second half of the century. For those models that could produce such scenarios, pessimistic assumptions about important technologies for decarbonizing non-electric energy supply significantly increased the discounted global mitigation costs of reaching about 450 ppm and about 550 ppm CO2 by the end of the century, with the effect being larger for more stringent goals. These studies also showed that reducing energy demand can potentially decrease mitigation costs significantly. 6, 3, 2, 6, 3, 4, 6, 3, 6, 6.4. Mitigation efforts will influence the costs of meeting other policy objectives. Recent studies indicate that climate policies significantly reduce the costs of reaching energy security and air quality objectives. Medium evidence, high agreement. The associated economic implications for these objectives are not taken into account in most scenario studies. Sectoral studies suggest that the potential for co-benefits of energy end-use mitigation measures outweighs the potential for adverse side effects, whereas the evidence suggests this may not be the case for all supply-side and follow measures. The overall welfare implications associated with these additional objectives have not been assessed thoroughly in the literature. 6.6. There is uncertainty about the potential of geoengineering by CDR or solar radiation management, SRM, to counteract climate change, and all techniques carry risks and uncertainties. High confidence. A range of different SRM and CDR techniques has been proposed, but no currently existing technique could fully replace mitigation or adaptation efforts. Nevertheless, many low GHG concentration scenarios rely on two CDR techniques: afforestation and biomass energy with carbon dioxide capture and storage, BECCS, which some studies consider to be comparable with conventional mitigation methods. Solar radiation management could reduce global mean temperatures, but with uneven regional effects, for example on temperature and precipitation, and it would not address all of the impacts of increased CO2 concentrations, such as ocean acidification. Techniques requiring large-scale interventions in the Earth system, such as ocean fertilization or stratospheric aerosol injections, carry significant risks. Although proposed geoengineering techniques differ substantially from each other, all raise complex questions about costs, risks, governance, and ethical implications of research and potential implementation. 6.9. Despite the advances in our understanding of transformation pathways since AR4, many avenues of inquiry remain unanswered. Important future research directions include the following: development of a broader set of socio-economic and technological storylines to support development of scenarios explicitly pursuing a wider set of climate goals, including those related to temperature change, more mitigation scenarios that include impacts from, and adaptations. 6. 419. Assessing transformation pathways. Chapter 6. 6. 2. A changing climate, including energy and land use systems critical for mitigation, expanded treatment of the benefits and risks of CDR and SRM options, expanded treatment of co-benefits and adverse side effects of mitigation pathways, improvements in the treatment and understanding of mitigation options and responses in end-use sectors in transformation pathways, and more sophisticated treatments of land use and land use-based mitigation options in mitigation scenarios. 6.10.
Deep breath. Another
At the
chapter.
time of AR4, the major table of contents, library, button, library, 7 energy system, 8 transport,
Another chapter under your belt,
toolbar,
as it were.
page 5 of 72, app switcher, Safari, files, figure 6, figure 6, files, done, figure 6 point, done, button, list,
Section.
button, figure 3.3, PNG, rows 12 to 23 of 64.
Son of a gun.
Dismiss pop-up. Figure 6, done, list, but, figure 6.3, 7, list,
Okay.
button. Figure 3.3, rows 12, rows 23, figure 9. Figure 7. Figure 6.36. Figure 6.3. Figure 6.36. PNG. Done.
Yes.
Button.
And that does mean.
Figure 6.36. A photo containing a diagram. Possible text. Transport buildings industry. 10.10.0.
All right.
Done. List. Button.
That does mean that there are.
Figure 2.4. PM. Rows 12 to 12. Figure 6.2.
This collection of
Figure
figures.
6.36. Figure 6.37. PNG.
Just be glad
Done.
I'm not showing them all
Button.
to you.
Figure 6.37. A photo containing a diagram.
Oh, one diagram.
Done. List.
Better
Button. Figure 3.3. PNG. Rows 12. Figure 6.36. Figure 6.37. Figure 6.38. PNG. Done. Button.
Obviously, there's lots of information
Figure 6.38. A photo containing a diagram.
available on their site for the willing adventurer.
App switcher. Safari. TyrrellMuseum.com and 3 other tabs.
Commercial break.
Safari.
As you've heard a few times,
Distance learning.
I've
Heading
been
level
going on
3.
about the Trail Museum,
Read distance learning.
wonderfulness
Heading
of
level.
it.
Visit. Link. Back. 4. Show book. Visit. Visited. Read more. 3. Keeping our patrons safe. Heading level 3.
They've been open and closed a couple of times.
Page
And
3 of
on
3.
the front page,
Location. 6 kilometers.
where is it?
Google Map link.
Located in Drumheller,
Highway.
Alberta, yes.
Location. Tyrrell bookings at gov.app.
No.
Bookings. Tyrrell. General inquiries.
Before
1.
that,
Outside North America. 4. Then. Toll free in 1. Toll free. Contact. Shop now. Museum souvenirs and gifts. Heading level 3. Shop now. Link. Toolbar. Back. Button.
if you want to buy yourself a dinosaur stuffy, I'm sure.
Home Royal Tyrrell Museum. Closed tab.
So I don't know what's visible here,
Address.
because
Tyrrell.
well, you can hear what my device
Address. TyrrellMuseumShop.com. Secure and Menu. Button.
Oh, there we go.
Shop by house and home. Shop by category. Heading level 2. Main. Landmark.
tells me. Is it a menu? Nope.
House and home. House and home. Heading level 2. Link.
I see.
View. 3 greater than sign. Apparel. Apparel. View. Accessories. Access. View. Artwork and books. View. Accessories. Heading level 2. Link.
Let's go to accessories, shall we?
Skip to content. In page link.
Like a mouse pad? Oh, jeez. Okay, I'm old. You're like, a mouse pad? What do you want a pad for your mouse for?
You're sure to find fun sort by.
Oh.
You're sure to find fun paleo gifts here. Whether you give them away or keep them is up to you. Heading level 2. Sort by. 23 products. Face masks. Regular price.
Oh, kill me
Description
now.
list
Face
start.
masks.
Page
Oh,
3
you
of
can't
4.
get away from
Logo
COVID.
pin. Regular price. $3. Page 1 of next page. Link.
Let's get away from the face mask, shall we? We all agree we've had enough of COVID,
Description
and it's-
list end. Description. You're sure to find fun paleo gifts here. Whether you get sort by 23 product button set 6 regular price buttons $4
Buttons, okay, that's
regular 20 dinosaur regular dinosaur umbrella link
That's what I want, is a dinosaur umbrella.
regular price
I never use an
just
umbrella.
$20
but-
spinning Gorgosaurus skull keychain link
A spinning skull?
regular $5 colorful Albertosaurus infinity scarf link
See, and maybe that one. You know, I used to wear...
regular price.
We call 'em a
Description list
bandana.
$22.95.
Anyway,
Description list end.
if you want
Description.
something to make your day go better...
Cretaceous guard regular
Oh.
Cretaceous garden shawl scarf.
That's clothing.
Regular price 22 pewter holiday wreaths. Link death pose card holder. Link
Death pose card holder.
regular price death pose card holder.
I can't even
Link
imagine. In any event, Royal Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology, linked in the comments. Buy yourself a death pose card holder and be the talk of the neighborhood. Back to work.
App switcher books active books book in addition in chapter 8 transport executive transport
And yes, this chapter has a one-word name, transport.
reducing global transport greenhouse gas GHG, emissions will be challenging since the continuing growth in passenger and freight activity could outweigh all mitigation measures unless transport emissions can be strongly decoupled from GDP growth. High confidence. The transport sector produced 7.0 gigatons CO2 equivalent of direct GHG emissions, including non-CO2 gases, in 2010 and hence was responsible for approximately 23% of total energy-related CO2 emissions, 6.7 gigatons CO2, 8.1. Growth in GHG emissions has continued since the fourth assessment report, AR4, in spite of more efficient vehicles road, rail, watercraft, and aircraft, and policies being adopted, robust evidence, high agreement, Section 8.1, 8.3. Without aggressive and sustained mitigation policies being implemented, transport emissions could increase at a faster rate than emissions from the other energy and use sectors and reach around 12 GT CO2 EG by 2050. Transport demand per capita in developing and emerging economies is far lower than in Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development (OECD) countries, but is expected to increase at a much faster rate in the next decades due to rising incomes and development of infrastructure. Analyses of both sectoral and integrated model scenarios suggest a higher emission reduction potential in the transport sector than the levels found possible in AR4 and at lower costs. Since many integrated models do not contain a detailed representation of infrastructural and behavioral changes, their results for transport can possibly be interpreted as conservative. If pricing and other stringent policy options are implemented in all regions, substantial decoupling of transport GHG emissions from gross domestic product (GDP) growth seems possible. A strong slowing of light-duty vehicle LDV travel growth per capita has already been observed in several OECD cities, suggesting possible saturation. Medium evidence, medium agreement, 8.6, 8.9, 8.10. Avoided journeys and modal shifts due to behavioral change, uptake of improved vehicle and engine performance technologies, low carbon fuels, investments in related infrastructure, and changes in the built environment. Together offer high mitigation potential, high confidence. Direct tank-to-wheel, GHG emissions from passenger and freight transport can be reduced by avoiding journeys where possible, by, for example, densifying urban landscapes, sourcing localized products, internet shopping, restructuring freight logistics systems, and utilizing advanced information and communication technologies. List start. Modal shift to lower carbon transport systems, encouraged by increasing investment in public transport, walking and cycling. List end. Infrastructure, and modifying roads, airports, ports, and railways to become more attractive for users and minimize travel time and distance. Lowering energy intensity, MJ, passenger km or MJ, ton km, by enhancing vehicle and engine performance, using lightweight materials, increasing freight load factors and passenger occupancy rates. Deploying new technologies such as electric three-wheelers. Reducing carbon intensity of fuel CO2 MJ, by substituting oil. Reducing carbon intensity of fuel CO2 MJ, by substituting oil-based products with natural gas, biomethane, or biofuels, electricity or hydrogen produced from low GHG sources. In addition, indirect GHG emissions arise during the construction of infrastructure, manufacture of vehicles, and provision of fuels well to tank. Robust evidence, high agreement, 8.3, 8.4, 8.6 and chapters 10, 11, 12. Both short and long-term transport mitigation strategies are essential if deep GHG reduction ambitions are to be achieved. High confidence. Short-term mitigation measures could overcome barriers to low-carbon transport options and help avoid future lock-in effects resulting, for example, from the slow turnover of vehicle stock and infrastructure and expanding urban sprawl. Changing behavior of consumers and businesses will likely play an important role but is challenging, and the possible outcomes, including modal shift, are difficult to quantify. UCNES initiatives to decarbonize freight transport have begun, but need support from policies that encourage shifting to low-carbon modes such as rail or waterborne options where feasible, and improving logistics. The impact of projected growth in world trade on freight transport emissions may be partly offset in the near term by more efficient vehicles, operational changes, slow steaming of ships, eco-driving and fuel switching. Other short-term mitigation strategies include reducing aviation contrails and emissions of particulate matter, including black carbon. Tropospheric ozone and aerosol precursors, including NOx, that can have human health and mitigation co-benefits in the short term. Medium evidence, medium agreement, 8.2, 8.3, 8.6, 8.10. Methane-based fuels are already increasing their share for road vehicles and waterborne craft. Electricity produced from low-carbon sources has near-term potential for electric rail and short to medium-term potential as electric buses, light-duty and two-wheel road vehicles are deployed. Hydrogen fuels from low-carbon sources constitute longer-term options. Gaseous and liquid biofuels can provide co-benefits. Their mitigation potential depends on technology advances, particularly advanced drop-in fuels for aircraft and other vehicles and sustainable feedstocks. Medium evidence, medium agreement, 8.2, 8.3. The technical potential exists to substantially reduce the current CO2 emissions per passenger or ton-kilometer for all modes by 2030. 8. 603. 8. And beyond. Energy efficiency and vehicle performance improvements range from 30–50% relative to 2010 depending on mode and vehicle type. Realizing this efficiency potential will depend on large investments by vehicle manufacturers, which may require strong incentives and regulatory policies in order to achieve GHG emissions reduction goals. Medium evidence. Medium agreement, 8.3, 8.6, 8.10.
Pardon me. I'm not perfect, you know. It's time
App switcher.
for pictures.
Files. Files. Done. Button. Done. List. Button. Figure 3.3, rows 12, rows 20, figure 9.1, figure 8.1, PNG image 100 and done.
This one,
button.
We did just have a commercial break after all, so.
Figure 8.1, a screenshot of a map with text and numbers.
Not much going on there.
Done. Button. List. Button. Figure 3.3, rows 12, figure 6. Figure 7. Figure 7.1, figure 8.2, PNG image 100 and done. Button.
Doop-a-doo.
App switcher. Safari. Books. Active. Books. Transport. There are oil price. Over the medium. 8 and beyond. Over the medium and beyond. Energy over the medium term, up to 2030, to long term, to 2050 and beyond. Urban, development and investments in new infrastructure, linked with integrated urban planning. Transit-oriented development and more compact urban form that supports cycling and walking can all lead to modal shifts. Such mitigation measures could evolve to possibly reduce GHG intensity by 20–50% below 2010 baseline by 2050. Although high potential improvements for aircraft efficiency are projected, improvement rates are expected to be slow due to long aircraft life, and fuel switching options being limited, apart from biofuels. Widespread construction of high-speed rail systems could partially reduce short to medium-haul air travel demand. For the transport sector, a reduction in total CO2 emissions of 15–40% could be plausible compared to baseline activity growth in 2050. Medium evidence, medium agreement, 8.3, 8.4, 8.6, 8.9, 12.3, 12.5. Barriers to decarbonizing transport for all modes differ across regions, but can be overcome in part by reducing the marginal mitigation costs. Medium evidence, medium agreement. Financial, institutional, cultural, and legal barriers constrain low-carbon technology uptake and behavioral change. All of these barriers include the high investment costs needed to build low-emissions transport systems, the slow turnover of stock and infrastructure, and the limited impact of a carbon price on petroleum fuels already heavily taxed. Other barriers can be overcome by communities, cities, and national governments which can implement a mix of behavioral measures, technological advances, and infrastructural changes. Infrastructure investments, USD, TCO2 avoided, may appear expensive at the margin, but sustainable urban planning and related policies can gain support when co-benefits, such as improved health and accessibility, can be shown to offset some or all of the mitigation costs. Medium evidence, medium agreement, 8.4, 8.7, 8.8. Oil price trends, price instruments on emissions, and other measures such as road pricing and airport charges can provide strong economic incentives for consumers to adopt mitigation measures. Regional differences, however, will likely occur due to cost and policy constraints. Some near-term mitigation measures are available at low marginal costs, but several longer-term options may prove more expensive. Full societal mitigation costs, USD, TCO2 of deep reductions by 2030 remain uncertain but range from very low or negative, such as efficiency improvements for LDVs, long-haul heavy-duty vehicles HDVs, and ships, to more than 100 USD, TCO2 for some electric vehicles, aircraft, and possibly high-speed rail. Such costs may be significantly reduced in the future, but the magnitude of mitigation cost reductions is uncertain. Limited evidence, low agreement, 8.6, 8.9. There are regional differences in transport mitigation pathways, with major opportunities to shape transport systems and infrastructure around low-carbon options, particularly in developing and emerging countries where most future urban growth will occur. Robust evidence, high agreement. Transport can be an agent of sustained urban development that prioritizes goals for equity and emphasizes accessibility, traffic safety, and time savings for the poor while reducing emissions, with minimal detriment to the environment and human health. Transformative trajectories vary with region and country due to differences in the dynamics of motorization, age and type of vehicle fleets, existing infrastructure, and urban development processes. Prioritizing access to pedestrians and integrating non-motorized and public transit services can result in higher levels of economic and social prosperity in all regions. Good opportunities exist for both structural and technological change around low-carbon transport systems in most countries, but particularly in fast-growing emerging economies where investments in mass transit and other low-carbon transport infrastructure can help avoid future lock-in to carbon-intensive modes. Mechanisms to accelerate the transfer and adoption of improved vehicle efficiency and low-carbon fuels to all economies, and reducing the carbon intensity of freight, particularly in emerging markets, could offset much of the growth in non-OECD emissions by 2030. It appears possible for LDV travel per capita in OECD countries to peak around 2035, whereas in non-OECD countries it will likely continue to increase dramatically from a very low average today. However, growth will eventually need to be slowed in all countries. Limited evidence, medium agreement, 8.7, 8.9. A range of strong and mutually supportive policies will be needed for the transport sector to decarbonize and for the co-benefits to be exploited. Robust evidence, high agreement. Decarbonizing the transport sector is likely to be more challenging than for other sectors, given the continuing growth in global demand, the rapid increase in demand for faster transport modes in developing and emerging economies, and the lack of progress to date in slowing growth of global transport emissions in many OECD countries. Transport strategies associated with broader non-climate policies at all government levels can usually target several objectives simultaneously to give lower travel costs, improved mobility, better health, greater energy security, improved safety, and time savings. Realizing the co-benefits depends on the regional context in terms of economic, social, and political feasibility, as well as having access to appropriate and cost-effective advanced technologies, medium evidence, high agreement, 8.4, 8.7. In rapidly growing developing economies, good opportunities exist for both structural and technological change around low-carbon transport. Established infrastructure may limit the options for modal shift and lead to a greater reliance on advanced vehicle technologies. Policy changes can maximize the mitigation potential by overcoming the barriers to achieving deep carbon reductions and optimizing the synergies. Pricing strategies, when supported by education policies to help curb transport. Chapter 8. 604. Chapter 8. Transport. 8. Social acceptance can help reduce travel demand and increase the demand for more efficient vehicles, for example, where fuel economy standards exist and induce a shift to low-carbon modes, where good modal choice is available. For freight, a range of fiscal, regulatory, and advisory policies can be used to incentivize businesses to reduce the carbon intensity of their logistical systems. Since rebound effects can reduce the CO2 benefits of efficiency improvements and undermine a particular policy, a balanced package of policies, including pricing initiatives, could help to achieve stable price signals, avoid unintended outcomes, and improve access, mobility, productivity, safety, and health. Medium evidence, medium agreement, 8.7, 8.9, 8.10. App switcher. Safari, Tyrrell, files, figure 8 file, figure 8 file, figure 8.2 done, list, figure 8.2 list button.
I'm a victim of my own enthusiasm.
Figure 3 point, rows 12 to figure 6.3 pn rows 20 figure 8.12 figure 8.2 figure 8.12 done button.
8 was the last chapter.
Figure 8.12. A photo containing a diagram. Possible text. 20202050 done.
That's a 30-year span.
List button.
Chapter 8
Figure
is
2.
not
Figure 4.1 rows 12 to figure 6.36 pm rows 20 figure 8.13 p figure 8.12 p figure 8.2 figure 8.12 figure 8.13 pm done
to that index
button.
page and saw that there were 4 chapters in this section.
Figure 8.13. A graph with multicolored lines and text.
Ooh, lovely. Multicolored lines and text.
App switch. Safari.
Sorry.
Books. Active.
It's a Canadian thing.
Books.
When we make fun of
Books.
ourselves.
Page.
We
7 of
British.
72.
The British can get mad at me for that if you like. I'm sure they sound like us when they want to make fun of us. Right.
159. Library. Button. Book. 7 Energy. 8. 12 Humans. 13 International Cooperation. Agreements and Instruments. Unknown author.
That's a good idea. International cooperation.
Toolbar.
This is the final chapter in this
Page.
section.
5. Non-UN Forums and Coalition. Chapter 13. International Cooperation, Agreements and Instruments.
That one.
This chapter critically examines and evaluates the ways in which agreements and instruments for international cooperation to address global climate change have been and can be organized and implemented. Drawing upon evidence and insights found in the scholarly literature. The retrospective analysis of international cooperation in the 2 p.m. Table of contents. Button.
Put down
Selected. Books. Page 2. Black text on a white background. Page 3. A screenshot of 2p. Selected. Grid view. Button. 1 of 3. Page 3. Screen recording in progress.
Yes, I know that.
Page 3.
Oh, I've broken it now. Just a moment.
App switcher. Safari. Files. Books. Active. Book. Page 4. Selected.
Okay.
Books.
All right.
List view. Button. 2. Page 3. Page 3. A screenshot of it. Page 2. Black text on a white background. Page 1. Black text on a white background. Page 3. A screenshot. Page 1 of 11. Page 3. A screenshot of a social media.
I don't know what
13 International Cooperation. App switcher. Safari. Files, books,
Books.
book,
It's a book.
page 4, selected, books, grid view, select, list view, bookmarked. 13 International Cooperation,
Yes.
resume, button,
Oh,
page, 6 of
I don't even know
82,
what that was.
table, library,
Okay,
button,
we need to go to the library because I didn't finish
15 National and
Chapter
sub,
8.
12 Humans, 8 Transport, unknown, toolbar,
I'm sure
page,
somebody noticed.
page, JR, greenhouse gas, C8, another area that there is a lack of, 8 transport, 8 social, knowledge gaps in the transport sector, there is a lack of comprehensive and consistent assessments of the worldwide potential for GHG emission reduction and especially costs of mitigation from the transport sector. Within this context, the potential reduction is much less certain for freight than for passenger modes. For LDVs, the long-term costs and high energy density potential for onboard energy storage is not well understood. Also requiring evaluation is how best to manage the trade-offs for electric vehicles between performance, driving range and recharging time, and how to create successful business models. Another area that requires additional research is in the behavioral economic analysis of the implications of norms, biases, and social learning and decision-making, and of the relationship between transport and lifestyle. For example, how and when people will choose to use new types of low-carbon transport and avoid making unnecessary journeys is unknown. Consequently, the outcomes of both positive and negative climate change impacts on transport services and scheduled timetables have not been determined, nor have the cost-effectiveness of carbon reducing measures in the freight sector and their possible rebound effects. Changes in the transport of materials as a result of the decarbonization of other sectors and adaptation of the built environment are unknown. 8.11.
Okay, let's try this again, shall we?
App switcher, Safari, files, figure, file,
Please
figure
forgive
8
me for
point
this.
files, figure 8 done, list, figure 8.1, list,
Keep in mind, I'm
button.
doing this with my eyes closed, right?
Figure 3.3, rows 12 to rows 20, figure
There's lots
9.1,
of
PM,
cues
rows 30, figure 11.1,
tell me where I am and why.
figure 11 point, figure 13.2, figure
Which is why I suddenly
13.1,
realized-
PNG image 4, done, button. Figure 13.1, a blue circle with text and arrows on a white background,
That I'd missed something.
done, list, button. Figure 4.1, rows 12, rows 20, figure 9.3, figure 11.1, figure 11. Figure 12. Figure 13.2, PNG image 100, done, button. Figure 13.2, a screenshot of a group of yellow boxes with black text on a white
A
background.
group of yellow boxes. Well, that intrigues me. Okay, let's drive the car
App switcher,
off
dot,
the grass.
Safari, to books,
Back
active,
onto the road.
books, page,
Roll the window down,
7
get
of
some air.
72,
Okay.
page, 7 of 78, social acceptance, can help reduce knowledge gaps in the 8, transport, chapter 8,
Right. Okay. All right.
library,
Back
button,
to chapter 13.
library, 7 energy system, 12 human set, 13 international, toolbar, page, 6,
Okey-doke.
climate change, 13, institutional feasibility of international, 13, institutional feasibility of international climate policy, 13, dot, 2,
Institutional
dot,
feasibility
2,
of international
dot,
climate policy.
4,
You can see why I
13.3,
swapped this with things
international
like
trade can
transport.
offer climate institution 13 institution international trade can offer a range of positive and net toolbar, page chooser, page 6, page 5,
And I'm on the wrong
international chapter, international cooperation, agreements and instruments,
page. That's what it's called.
chapter, executive summary.
Wow. Will you forgive me?
This chapter critically examines and
Thanks.
evaluates the ways in which agreements and instruments for international cooperation to address global climate change have been and can be organized and implemented. Drawing upon evidence and insights found in the scholarly literature. The retrospective analysis of international cooperation in the chapter discusses and quantifies what has been achieved to date and surveys the literature on explanations of successes and failures.
So just to clarify,
International Cooperation, Agreements and Instruments.
that is the title of the chapter, despite my stumbling around in the dark there.
This chapter international cooperation is necessary to significantly mitigate climate change impacts, robust evidence, high agreement. This is principally due to the fact that greenhouse gases, GHGs, mix globally in the atmosphere, making anthropogenic climate change a global commons problem. International cooperation has the potential to address several challenges, multiple actors that are diverse in their perceptions of the costs and benefits of collective action, emission sources that are unevenly distributed, heterogeneous climate impacts that are uncertain and distant in space and time, and mitigation costs that vary. Section 13.2.1.1, 13.15. International cooperation on climate change has become more institutionally diverse over the past decade, robust evidence, high agreement. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, remains a primary international forum for climate negotiations, but other institutions have emerged at multiple scales, global, regional, national, and local, as well as public-private initiatives and transnational networks. 13.3.1, 13.4.14, 13.5, 13.12. This institutional diversity arises in part from the growing inclusion of climate change issues in other policy arenas, e.g., sustainable development, international trade, and human rights. These and other linkages create opportunities, potential co-benefits, or harms that have not yet been thoroughly examined. Issue linkage also creates the possibility of forum shopping and increased negotiation costs, which could distract from or dilute the performance of international cooperation toward climate goals. 13.3, 13.4, 13.5. Existing and proposed international climate agreements vary in the degree to which their authority is centralized, robust evidence, high agreement. The range of centralized formalizations spans strong multilateral agreements, such as the Kyoto Protocol targets, harmonized national policies such as the Copenhagen, Cancun pledges, and decentralized but coordinated national policies, such as planned linkages of national and subnational emissions trading schemes. 13.4.1, 13.4.3. Additionally, potential agreements vary in their degree of legal bindingness. 13.4.2.1. Three other design elements of international agreements have particular relevance: goals and targets, flexible mechanisms, and equitable methods for effort sharing. 13.4.2. The UNFCCC is currently the only international climate policy venue with broad legitimacy, due in part to its virtually univa SAL membership, robust evidence, medium agreement. The UNFCCC continues to develop institutions and systems for governance of climate change. 13.2.2.4, 13.3.1, 13.4.1.4, 13.5.
If I'm not mistaken, the UNFCCC stands for the United Nations Forum on Climate Change. I didn't notice them saying it. I'm surprised they didn't. Maybe they did.
Non-UN forums and coalitions of non-state actors, such as private businesses and city-level governments, are also contributing to international cooperation on climate change, medium evidence, medium agreement. These forums and coalitions address issues including deforestation, technology transfer, adaptation, and fossil fuel subsidies. However, their actual mitigation performance is unclear. 13.5.1.3, 13.13.1.4. International cooperation may have a role in stimulating public investment, financial incentives, and regulations to promote technological innovation, thereby more actively engaging the private sector with the climate regime. Medium evidence. Medium agreement. Technology policy can help lower mitigation costs, thereby increasing incentives for participation and compliance with international cooperative efforts, particularly in the long run. Equity issues can be affected by domestic intellectual property rights regimes, which can alter the rate of both technology transfer and the development of new technologies. 13.3, 13.9, 13.12. In the absence of, or as a complement to, a binding, international agreement on climate change, policy linkages among existing and nascent regional, national, and subnational climate policies offer potential climate change mitigation and adaptation benefits. Medium evidence, medium agreement, 13.3.1, 13.5.1.3. Direct and indirect linkages between and among subnational, national, and regional carbon markets are being pursued to improve market efficiency. Yet integrating climate policies raises a number of concerns about the performance of a system of linked legal rules and economic activities. Linkage between carbon markets can be stimulated by competition between and among public and private governance regimes, accountability measures, and the desire to learn from policy experiments. 13.3.1, 13.5.3, 13.6, 13.7, 13.2.3, Figure 13.4. While a number of new institutions are focused on adaptation funding and coordination, adaptation has historically received less attention than mitigation in international climate policy. But inclusion of adaptation is increasingly important to reduce damages and may engage a greater number of countries. Robust evidence, medium agreement. Other possible complementarities and trade-offs between mitigation and adaptation, particularly the temporal distribution of actions, are not well understood. 13.2, 13.3.3, 13.5.1.1, 13.14. Participation in international cooperation on climate change can be enhanced by monetary transfers, market-based mechanisms, technology transfer, and trade-related measures. Robust evidence, medium agreement. These mechanisms to enhance participation, along with compliance, legitimacy, and flexibility, affect the 1005. 13. Institutional feasibility of international climate policy. 13.2.2.4, 13.3.3, 13.8.1, 13.9.2.
I used to be able to skip over
App switcher. Safari files.
endless
Figure
listings
13.
of brackets,
Figure 13. Files.
but then people
Done.
put them in the
Figure
middle of
13.
chapters,
Done. Button.
paragraphs.
List. Button. Figure 13.2. List. Button.
And so I was
Figure
required to listen
4.1.
to them. and
PNG
you
image.
similarly.
Rows 12 to Figure 6.3.
To get through
Figure 6. Figure 5.21. Figure 4.3. Figure 5.2. PNG image 205 kilobyte. Done. Button. Figure 5.2. A photo containing a diagram.
That's very
Done.
helpful.
List. Button. Figure 4. Rows 12. Figure 6.3. Figure 5.1. PNG image. Figure 4.3. Figure 5.1. Figure 5.2. PNG image. Done. Button. Figure 5.2. Figure 5.2. A photo containing a diagram.
And just to keep me on my toes, because I've already messed up on this chapter.
App switcher. Files. Figure 5.2.
Wait a
Active.
minute.
Actions available. Dog. Mail. 11 and red. Files.
You're
Figure
wondering
5.
if it's
Figure 5. Files. Done. Button.
If it's chapter 13,
Done. List. Button.
why is he showing us pictures from chapter
Figure
5?
3.2. Rows 12 to rows 20. Rows 30. Figure 11.2.
Apparently I've already
Rows
stopped
4.
this
Figure 13.2. Figure
particular
13.1. PNG. Done. Button.
Should have had lunch first, I think.
Figure 13.1. A blue circle with text and arrows on a white background.
Oh no, that sounds interesting.
Done.
Lesson
List. Button.
Next time, have lunch first.
Figure 13, rows 53, figure 14.16,
Well, now it stays
rows
there.
40, figure 12.2, figure 12. Figure 13.3, figure 13.2, PNG done. Button.
As I was about to say,
Figure 13.2. A screenshot of a group of yellow boxes with black text on a white
there's the
background.
yellow boxes.
Done. List. Button. Figure 3.2,
To really keep me on my
PNG, rows
toes,
12, rows 20, figure
We've also
8.13,
changed
rows 30, figure
the number of
11.2,
images that we can access.
figure 11.2, figure 12. Figure 13.3, PNG
Up until
image
now,
4
it's been an even
done.
number of images,
Button.
but this one has 5 images.
Figure 13.3. A screenshot of a map with text and numbers.
All right. I'll try to hold it together.
App
till we're
switcher.
done.
File. Safari. Book. File. Books.
Books.
Active. Books. Book. International. 13. Institutional feasibility of international trade can offer a rate. Climate change policies can be evaluated using 4 criteria: environmental effectiveness, aggregate economic performance, distributional impacts, and institutional feasibility. These criteria are grounded in several principles: maximizing global net benefits, equity, and the related principles of distributive justice and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities (CBDRRC), precaution and the related principles of anticipation and prevention of future risks, and sustainable development. These criteria may at times conflict, forcing trade-offs among them. 13.2.1, 13.2.2. International cooperation has produced political agreement regarding a long-term goal of limiting global temperature increase to no more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. But the overall level of mitigation achieved to date by cooperation appears inadequate to achieve this goal. Robust evidence, medium agreement. Mitigation pledges by individual countries in the Copenhagen-Cancun regime, if fully implemented, will help reduce emissions in 2020 to below the projected business-as-usual level, but are unlikely to attain an emission level in 2020 consistent with cost-effective pathways, based on the immediate onset of mitigation, that achieve the long-term 2 degrees Celsius goal with a greater than 50% probability. The contribution of international cooperation outside of the UNFCCC is largely not quantified. 13.2.2.1, 13.13.1. The Kyoto Protocol was the first binding step toward implementing the principles and goals provided by the UNFCCC, but it has had limited effects on global emissions because some countries did not ratify the protocol. Some parties did not meet their commitments, and its commitments applied to only a portion of the global economy. Medium evidence, low agreement. The parties collectively surpassed their collective emission reduction target in the first commitment period, but the protocol credited emissions reductions that would have occurred even in its absence. The Kyoto Protocol does not directly influence the emissions of non-annexed countries, which have grown rapidly over the past decade. 13.13.1.1. The flexible mechanisms under the Kyoto Protocol have generally helped to improve its economic performance, but their environmental effectiveness is less clear. Medium evidence, medium agreement. The Clean Development Mechanism, CDM, created a market for emissions offsets from developing countries, generating credits equivalent to nearly 1.4 billion TCO2 as of October 2013, many of which have been generated by low-cost mitigation technologies. The CDM showed institutional feasibility of a project-based market mechanism under widely varying circumstances. The CDM's environmental effectiveness has been mixed due to concerns about the additionality of projects, the validity of baselines, the possibility of emissions leakage, and recent price decreases. Its distributional impacts were limited due to the concentration of projects in a limited number of countries. The protocols are the flexible mechanisms, joint implementation and international emissions trading, have been undertaken both by governments and private market participants, but have raised concerns related to government sales of emission units. 13.7.2, 13.13.1.2. Recent UNFCCC negotiations have sought to include more ambitious mitigation commitments from countries with commitments under the Kyoto Protocol, mitigation contributions from a broader set of countries, and new finance and technology mechanisms, medium evidence, low agreement. Under the 2010 Cancun Agreement, developed countries formalized voluntary pledges of quantified, economy-wide emission reduction targets, and some developing countries formalized voluntary pledges to mitigation actions. The distributional impact of the agreement will depend in part on the magnitude and sources of financing, including the successful fulfillment by developed countries of their expressed joint commitment to mobilize $100 billion per year by 2020 for climate action in developing countries. Under the 2011 Durban Platform for Enhanced Action, delegates agreed to craft a future legal regime that would be applicable to all parties, under the convention, and would include substantial new financial support and technology arrangements to benefit developing countries, but the delegates did not specify means for achieving those ends. 13.5.1.1, 13.11, 13.13.1.3. The Montreal Protocol, aimed at protecting the stratospheric ozone layer, has also achieved significant reductions in global GHG emissions, robust evidence, high agreement. The Montreal Protocol set limits on emissions of ozone-depleting gases that are also potent GHGs, such as chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs, and hydrochlorofluorocarbons, HCFCs. Substitutes for those ozone-depleting gases, such as hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, which are not ozone-depleting, may also be potent GHGs. Lessons learned from the Montreal Protocol, for example, about the effect of financial and technological transfers on broadening participation in an international environmental agreement, could be of value to the design of future international climate change agreements. 13.3.3, 13.3.4, 13.13.1.4. Assessment of proposed cooperation structures reinforces the finding that there will likely be trade-offs between the four criteria, as they will inevitably conflict in some elements of any agreement. Medium evidence, high agreement. Assessment of proposed climate policy architectures reveals important trade-offs that international cooperation, agreements and instruments. Chapter 13. Assessment of proposed cooperation structures reinforces the assessment of proposed cooperation structures reinforces the finding that there will likely be trade-offs between the four criteria, as they will inevitably conflict in some elements of any agreement. Medium evidence, high agreement. Assessment of proposed climate policy architectures reveals important trade-offs that international cooperation, agreements and instruments. Chapter 13. 1006.
Mistakes today.
Chapter 13. International cooperation, agreements and instruments. Depend on the specific design elements and regulatory mechanisms of a proposal. For example, there is a potential trade-off between broad participation and the institutional feasibility of an ambitious environmental performance goal. The extent of this trade-off may depend on financial transfers, national enforcement mechanisms, and the distribution and sharing of mitigation efforts. 13.2.2.5, 13.3.3, 13.13.1.4, 13.13.2.
Okie doke.
Toolbar. Page chooser. Page 7.
At least I'm on the right
Adjustable.
page.
App switcher.
Nice.
Safari. Files. Figure 13. Files. Figure done. Button. List. Figure 13.3. 51. List. Button. Figure 4.2. Rows 12 to Figure 6.3. Rows 20. Figure 9.1. P. Rows 30. Figure 11.2. P. Figure 12. Figure 13.1. Figure 13.3. Figure 13.4. PN. Done. Button.
I sure hope these figures are of some benefit.
Figure 13.4. An illustration of a map with text on it. Possible text.
Maps.
Isla. Eve.
Maps are a real craft, aren't they?
Done. List. Button. Figure 4.1. Rows 12 to 23 of 60. Rows 20. Figure 9.2. Rows 30. Figure 11. Figure 12. Figure 13.4. Figure 13.5. PNG. Done. Button. Figure 13.5. A screenshot of a graph with text and numbers. Possible text. LU30. 19902005 20 App Switcher Safari Tyrell Books
Maybe
Active.
You can tell me one day what an LU30
Actions
is.
available. Books Page. Increasing it. Depend on the gaps. Chapter. International. Depend on the specific. Increasing in Chapter 13. Bookmark. International co-op. Depend on the specific design elements and regulatory mechanisms of a proposal. For example, there is a potential trade-off between broad participation and the institutional feasibility of an ambitious environmental performance goal. The extent of this trade-off may depend on financial transfers, national enforcement mechanisms, and the distribution and sharing of mitigation efforts. 13.2.2.5, 13.3.3, 13.13.1.4, 13.13.2. Increasing interest in solar radiation management, SRM, and carbon dioxide removal, CDR, as strategies to mitigate the harms of climate change, pose new challenges for international cooperation. Medium evidence, high agreement. Whereas emissions abatement poses challenges of engaging multilateral action to cooperate, SRM may pose challenges of coordinating research and restraining unilateral deployment of measures with potentially adverse side effects. 13.4.4. Gaps in knowledge and data. 1. Comparisons among proposals in terms of aggregate and country-level costs and benefits per year, with incorporation of uncertainty. 2. Assessment of the overall effect of emerging intergovernmental and transnational arrangements, including hybrid approaches. 3. Understanding of complementarities and trade-offs between policies affecting mitigation and adaptation. 4. Understanding how international cooperation on climate change can help achieve co-benefits and development goals, including capacity-building approaches. 5. Understanding the factors that affect national decisions to join and form agreements. Toolbar. Page chooser.
Well,
Page 7. International co-op.
That's where I'm supposed to end?
International cooperation.
I mean...
Where the... Apps. Books. Active. Files. Safari. Safari.
Okay.
Skip page 2 of 3. Hours.
Say goodbye to Terrell.
Shop now. Link is external. Hours. Heading temporarily closed. Multimedia. Report. In page link, the Working Group 3 contribution to the IPCC's 5th Assessment Report, AR5, assesses literature on the scientific, technological, environmental, economic and social aspects of mitigation of climate change since 2007 when the 4th Assessment Report, AR4, was released. Heading Level 3.
There it is. Again and again and again. Links in the comments. www.ipcc.ch, which is the country indicator for Sweden. Switzerland, sorry. Oh, no, I'm confused. Anyway, whatever, it's a European country. Feel free and please go there and look up information in case I've confused you, which is entirely possible today. If I have confused
Music
you...
Alive, Barefoot, a talk, 4, a talking game, at barefootfreelance.ca.
Sorry. You can access, as I said,
40, a talking game YouTube channel visited,
from this
link,
page in the comments.
Image,
And
a photo, share, organized by Care, image.
if you want to tell me about it in person,
Question mark,
how bad it was,
public group, middle dot, 13 members, image, Calgary, image, understanding the IPCC,
Here's
heading
the
level
group.
1, link,
which
main,
occurs to me I have not
landmark.
linked before. in the comments
Actions
about around this
available.
time. And last Monday of every month. Thank you very much for your patience, and take care.
App switcher. Safari. Dock. Safari.
Actually.
Understand. Screen recording in progress.